we're doing a series where we're talking about the parables of Jesus, because if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, you have to actually know what he says. And so we're taking some of the parables of Jesus, some of them will be more familiar. I think today will be a very familiar one, and we're pausing and really kind of looking at his words, because we make Christianity to be a lot of things, I think especially in America. But, Christians in Antioch, they were actually first called Christians in Antioch, and it was sort of a slur, because it's like they're little Christ. They're acting like Jesus. And, and so we like this term followers, because it's this idea of we become like a disciple would become like the one they follow. And we want to follow the leader. We want to become like Jesus, and we want our actions, we want our words, we want our lives to be transformed. And so the more we understand and know what he says, the better we can follow him. And so we're kind of taking a break this summer and just looking at some parables. And today we're going to explore a parable that may be familiar to you. It should be. It's another one of my favorites, and I mention it regularly. It's kind of funny. I know I have certain scriptures and parables and things I hit. So this is one that we should be familiar with, but we're going to explore it a little more deeply. And so in Matthew chapter 5, we begin in verse 11. God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you're my followers. Be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. When we think blessed, and you think of hashtag blessed, and you go online, you could search that in different social media. We might have different ideas for what that means. Like for most of us, maybe it's to get a new truck or a vacation somewhere tropical, but Jesus sort of frames it a little differently. And following Jesus produces life change. We're called to this different way of life. And at times, that behavior and identity can bring persecution. People don't always like who you are. And the joy isn't in persecution, but it's in the promise of eternal reward. So you are not happy like, oh boy, I can't wait to get persecuted. But there is this final hope. And so Jesus continues in Matthew 5:13, says, you are the salt of the earth, but what good is salt if it has lost its flavor? Can you make it salty again? It will be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless. And salt, I don't know about you. I'm getting better at cooking. I'm only years old, and I'm finally learning to cook a little better. And one of the main ingredients when you cook is what? Yeah, because it really does change the flavor of food. And, I remember a couple of years ago, they were really popular, those salt lamps. I think mine's in a closet here somewhere. We had that at Deepwater, and it was a giant chunk of salt that glue. Anybody remember those? But if you know me, and you probably know, the first thing I did when I took it out of the thing was to check that it was really salt. It was salty, and it was. There's something about it, and salt gives us flavoring. It gives us preservation. There's agricultural uses, and the point of salt is it changes. It makes things better when you use it properly, right? And the world should be better. As Christians move into the neighborhood, a couple years ago, someone had this challenging question for the church. They were kind of challenging church pastors. Would anyone who doesn't go to your church miss it if it disappeared? And it really challenged you to go, is the church being salt in the world in such a way that we would miss it if it wasn't there? And so I think a challenging question for us as individuals then might be, would anyone miss your influence if you disappeared? Now, again, there's all kinds of things with that. And, and Jesus says, if the salt loses its saltiness, and I think my immediate thought on that is being a chemist, for years of, I'm thinking NaCl and anyone else. I literally don't write salt a lot of times. I write NaCl, and there's different types of salt. Anyway, but, unsalty salt, is there unwet water? Unsweet sugar? Anyway, before we get into that. And, there's no expiration on salt, right? Like it's in your cabinet, it's in there forever. And has anyone ever been like, honey, the salt's gone bad, better put that on the list? Anyone? No. I mean, you just kind of, it gets moist and you kind of bang it a few times and you keep going at it. You know, you could go to your grandma's pantry. It could be left over from the Civil War. It would still be salty. But so I think immediately I don't understand that. But then you look around the Dead Sea, it could get mixed with other minerals. It's so not just NaCl, and so you get unsalty salt. So it looked like salt, but isn't salt. I think that's the image Jesus is using here. The point is, Jesus is not trying to teach us chemistry, right? He's not trying to, you guys need to understand the sodium and the chloride ions and how it bonds. Or the point is, we have a purpose, and we should fulfill that. But, our lives should be different, and we have this way of living that should be different. 1 Peter chapter 4 says this, starting in verse 2. It says, "You won't spend the rest of your lives chasing your own desires, but you will be anxious to do the will of God. You have had enough in the past of the evil things that godless people enjoy, their immorality and lust, their feasting and drunkenness and wild parties, and their terrible worship of idols." And, things are different. Now, I was in high school just yesterday, it seems, but I'm not. And it's like next thing you know, your kids are, out of high school and in college. And I was driving through Delaware. We went off the beaten path because the tolls are so high sometimes. So we were taking sort of a more scenic route through Delaware. And I happened to see this sign. I posted it online. Some of you maybe have seen it. I went to there was this pizza place, and it says established in 1990. And they said they'd been in business for, 35 years. And I was like, I felt some kind of way about that because, some of you were maybe born after that. Some of us went to high school and graduated then. And so it made me feel some kind of way since I graduated way back in the late 1900s. But life is short, and it goes quickly. We were just having a conversation about how fast, when you're a kid, like summer seems really long, right? Those 3 months of summer. Anyone else feel like you blink and you're going to miss it now? It's like the only thing summer is, too, when you're old is like it's hotter when you work. It's, it's not as much fun. But life is short, and we should enjoy it. But I think also, if we don't frame it in the right way, we don't live in a way that honors God, life is short, and the way we live, we should live in a way that honors God. It says you won't spend the rest of your lives chasing your own desires. I think in America, we have a treat yourself kind of attitude, right? I think sometimes we don't like to put our natural desires and things in check. We think we should just, whatever we feel like doing, we should do them, right? Like, I don't know if anyone, ever has seen that. I'm sure you guys don't ever do that. But we have natural desires and we want to follow, and not all of them are good, right? There's this self-indulgence. Now, as a Christian, I can indulge in brownies or tacos, but I shouldn't indulge in sin. And a lot of people, we don't want to. And in the ancient world, I like history, and so I've been reading some things about, the ancient world and the way Christians lived. And Christians abstained from the popular forms of Roman entertainment. They didn't go to the theater with the risque performances. They didn't go to the chariot races, gladiatorial fights with blood and gore, and I don't know how that translates to whether we should watch football or not. I don't know. And so the Christian lifestyle really, it also condemned the pleasures that I think a lot of us, even in American culture, we've kind of made some of the things that Christians pushed against into values. Indulgent temper. We like us some anger. I'm in a Facebook group for bad drivers in Delaware. Anyone else in that one too? I joined just to see if I ever get posted. No, but man, people are angry in that group sometimes, and sometimes rightly so. I get it, but so Christians condemned indulgent temper, sex outside marriage, drinking, slander, lying, covetous, theft, all these things, and it was interesting because in their culture, some of the Romans actually thought they're haters of humanity and traitors to the Roman way of life. But the point is, people live differently when they follow Jesus. And there's times that will put you at odds with the culture. Because our culture is indulgent and wants to do things, but how we spend our life matters in this world. And the way we live honors God. It says, an American poet said, time is the coin in your life. It's the only coin you have, the only way you can determine how it will, and only you can determine how you spent. Be careful lest you let others spend it for you. And so we all have time, and like money, we determine how we spend it, how we invest it, and it's and when we waste it, there's eternal consequences. We only have this short amount of time on this earth, and sort of, I think the dilemma for all generations is, do I go along with the culture, or do I push back and live a holy life? And I think the second thing then is, where do I go along with the culture and push back? Because, our culture, not everything about our culture is evil. Not everything is bad. But we do have this way of life, this way of living that needs to be different. And so we push back against it when we live this different way. And it says, you had enough in the past. And the truth is, all of us have, and this is where I struggle, because, not that I struggle, but we all have this propensity towards sin. And we all have sin in our past. And we will sin again. But we hopefully you can learn from the past. You can learn from other people. And I do a lot of stupid stuff, if you know me. I have lots of scars all over my body. Whenever I wear shorts, people are like, "What happened there?" I'm like, "I don't even remember that one." Some of you have seen me in shorts. You've done this. I remember I had a stupid kettlebell injury a couple years ago. I can't even explain it, because we all have kettlebell injuries, right? Anyway, I crushed my fingers doing something kind of stupid, and the fingernails don't even grow right anymore because of that. And so here's the thing: I was an idiot. I can't feel my fingertips anymore. My fault. Now, you can either learn from me and my mistakes, or you can go and do your own mistakes, right? And so the wisdom is, for those of us who've had longer time, we ran after other things. We run after sin, and it doesn't turn out well in the long term. And so we learn from those, and we share that with others. And we don't want to run after sin. We've had enough of that in the past. And the worship of idols. And I think. I think sometimes when we think of the worship of idols, we think everyone laying it down around a statue or something and worshiping. I don't know that any of us have trouble with like carved statues of other gods, but often we put things that God has made in the place of Him, and that's idolatry. When we take things that He's created for us that are good, and we elevate them above all things, it's in our culture we have a lot of problems with this. And it says this: of course, your former friends are surprised when you no longer plunge into the flood of wild and destructive things they do, so they slander you. But remember, they will have to face God, who stands ready to judge everyone, both the living and the dead. They no longer plunge. We all, still sin, but we'll never be sinless. But we should sin less as we grow in Christ, as we begin to follow Him. I remember very distinctly, I think it was probably in the 80s, but remember the Nestea plunge? Some of you are like too young to remember. Some of you were like going, "We don't know what this was." But it was basically this big plunge, and I don't know. And you kind of picture like maybe like at a pool, if you just like plunged back, you got really wet, and that was sort of a thing, and that's kind of where a lot of us were before Christ. You indulge in your sin. You plunge into it. You make plans to sin, right? Like your Saturday night is scheduled for sin. Versus, as we grow in Christ, it's more like, you accidentally stumble and get a little sin. And so it's this different way of life. And there is this holiness to faith. I always say it's like the two pedals of a bicycle. There is, and we have to do our part, and God will work with us, but there is a discipline to faith of deciding, I'm not going to live this way anymore. I'm going to be salt. like he says. And 1 Peter 4, chapter 4, verse 14 says, "You are insulted. If you are insulted because you bear the name of Christ, you will be blessed. For the glorious Spirit of God rests upon you. If you suffer, however, it must not be for murder, stealing, making trouble, or prying into other people's affairs. But it is no shame to suffer for being a Christian. Praise God for the privilege of being called by his name." It must not be for murder, for stealing, making trouble, prying into people's affair. Most of us know people who get persecuted for living poorly. And I've got so many examples of this. I'm always afraid I'm going to say too much and you're going to know the person because this is Delaware. but I often know people who would say, "I get persecuted for my faith." And, you get persecuted because you're bad at your job, and you're persecuted because you're online complaining about people on Facebook instead of doing your job. And, and we need to live in a way that we are salt to the world. We should add flavor to it. You might get persecuted, but be persecuted for being salt, not salty with people. See that? Salty. Okay, we all know salty is not a good thing in some contexts. But Colossians 4:5 says, "Live wisely among those who are not believers and make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be gracious and attractive," or so that you will have the right response for everyone. If you read the NLT note, or maybe some other translation, let your conversation be seasoned with salt. The idea is salty speech in a good way, not racy or coarse humor. And things are better with salt, right? Like, do you like popcorn? Do you like popcorn without salt? It's terrible. It's like eating packing peanuts or something. I would just as soon, get a package from Amazon, open it up and eat the packing material. Salt makes things better. And so, Paul wants the Colossians here to realize that there are opportunities to share Christ. Salt makes things better. Anyone I like beach. I mean, I love the mountains, and I love, being in the middle of, God's great creation. But there's something about the beach, and I love the ocean. There's something about it that reminds me of how big God is and how small I am. But if I'm at the beach, I want fries. Anyone else? And and fries, if you forget the salt, man, they're not the same, right? It's like salty, vinegary. Maybe some of you are into, I don't know, just lots. Oh man, my mouth is watering as I talk about the fries. I'm probably going to have to make a drive down there this week. Or when it's seasoned well to your liking, fries are great, right? And it's kind of like a restaurant. You ever go to a restaurant and it's like seasoned just right? I know some of you are like kind of foodies. Man, when that chef gets it just right, you're telling everyone about it, right? You're like, man, you got to go to this place. And that's really how, when we live wisely, we should be seasoned with salt. We should be seasoned correctly. And, you live wisely. Our behavior should be attractive. And, and we have these opportunities to make good or bad choices and apply our faith. It says make the most out of every opportunity. We use our time wisely. There's no guarantee you'll live another day. I do a lot of funerals, which is kind of a funny part of my job. And sometimes it's often for people I didn't know. Like they just, they kind of call me like, "Hey, their pastor can't make it. Can you go do a funeral?" And it's always an interesting process because, when you go into funerals, it's often for someone who maybe left too soon, and there's this awkwardness to it, and and usually at funerals you really start thinking about, am I living my life the way I should? Because you realize that often time is short, and we don't have as much time as we want. And so when you live that way, you think about how I spend my time matters. And so we should live in a way, we should live our life in a way that we understand that something matters, something that lasts. And God has ultimately placed you in a place to be his witness to the world, to be salt and to be light. And there's words to that, which is another thing, but it's also the way we live. God has put you there to do something to affect people. And so we need to be sure that we live in a way that is right before God. Jesus continues the metaphor. He says, you are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. Now, that was similar. We touched on that in Mark a little bit. But light, it's, hide it under a bushel. I'm going to let it shine. We're going to see who went to Sunday school. There you go. You got the little, with your ET finger glowing. No. It's sort of the image there is have you ever lit a candle in darkness? What happens? Suddenly light. And if there's one light on in the room, and if we can't really shut off the lights here. Well, we could, but we're going to see from outside. But if there was one light in the room, you'd kind of naturally look to it, right? And there's something about a light in the darkness, and we're generally attracted to light in darkness. There's something about flying at night. Anyone fly much? I know you fly a lot, but it's you when you look down at night and you see little lights, in cities and things. I think that's so. I always wonder what people are doing down there. Anyone? Or the opposite is true. If it's night and I'm outside and there's one plane, we constantly have planes fly over us because probably going to Philly Airport, and sometimes I actually get on the website now and try to figure out where the planes are going because my daughter's into aviation. So anyone else? I'm the only nerd. Okay. But you look up at these planes and you kind of wonder, right? And so there's this, a little light. We're attracted to that. We're interested in those things, and you see the lights above, and we wonder about the people there. We see the lights below on the ground. We wonder who's flying above us. And so we're attracted to light. And Philippians 2:15 says, live clean and innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people. And so our lives need to shine light. And that's the way Jesus has designed us to live. And so we need to shine back that light we see. I think the American church, we talk a lot about blessed, to kind of go back to the first part of there. And Tony Evans used this example years ago, and I loved it. If you read Genesis 12:1, the Lord said to Abram, leave your native country and your relatives, your father's family, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you. And often I think when we hear blessing in America, we think, man, I want to be blessed, right? But our blessing isn't just for us. Our blessing is so we can bless. And, Tony Evans used this example, cul-de-sac versus conduits. And we live in an area where there's lots of cul-de-sacs, right? That's a very American thing, a street that just kind of ends in the little circle, and that's cute. But I think a lot of Americans, we think of our blessing as for us. It's a cul-de-sac. Versus a conduit is something that kind of brings something to somewhere else. And now I'm thinking wiring conduits, and some of you are who do wiring and things. And it's, the idea is it's to bring it through to something else. And God blesses us, not so we can hoard it ourselves, but God blesses us so that we can be a blessing to other people. And I travel a little bit, and I like local restaurants. I don't know does anyone go and just eat at chains? You're just oh, McDonald's, I'd love to try their McDonald's. That's fine if that's what you're into, man. That's cool. But when you travel, what do you do to find new restaurants? Anyone? Google, Yelp reviews. It's you kind of look at reviews. You ask local people. Although sometimes they're you want good barbecue? Drive 20 miles out this road. There's a guy in a shack. No. And there's some scary places they send you for barbecue, but it's good barbecue, and I haven't been murdered yet. But it's you generally you might ask some locals. I'll ask people where they eat, because although it was funny, I remember working at the beach and people were asking me where to go get seafood, and I'm like, the Bay, because I didn't know people ordered it in restaurants. I thought you had to go get your own. That's how we grew up. They're like, where do you eat crabs? I'm like, at my house? I guess I could eat them at the booth, but that would be weird because I worked in this little camping booth. But you might ask locals. And so, the idea is, we need to be blessings to people in a way that we're the light. And, we're kind of like the Google reviews of Jesus. Because the way we live, that's how people will judge our faith. We've often said you may be the only Bible some people ever read. And we need to live our faith in a way that we attract other people. And, if you have a moth, anyone, and you probably don't have a pet moth or anything, that would be weird. But like, if I'm working in the garage, sometimes at night, I leave the light on, and you're kind of going in and out, and then next thing you know, you've got all kinds of insects inside. And then I try to turn the light on outside and close it and get them out, because I don't want to just kill them all. And I don't want a garage full of moths and things, but because that's weird. But, moths are what? They're drawn to light. And in the same way, people will be drawn to light if you live as light in the world. And, ultimately, we're created in the image of God, and so we live like him. He was salt to the world. He was light to the world, and we're called to live in that way too. As the worship team comes back to play, light. I was thinking of this as an analogy. It's, if you fly at night, they kind of light up the runway. We're the light of the world. We're showing a lost in a world where to land. And ultimately, we need to live in this way. That we live differently because we're redeemed and regenerated. And that means often we're in a world where there's a lot of strife, right? Anyone? Everyone go outside, meet some people. Everyone's angry and frustrated. And when in the world there's strife, we need to be peacemakers. We need to follow Jesus. In the world where there's hatred, we're to exemplify the love of Jesus and returning good for evil, not evil for evil. And often, and I think often when Christians get their saltiest, in the good way salty, not the bad way salty, it's like be salt and light, not salty and lit. But also be salty and lit, because anyway. But it's often when we begin to again live in a Christian bubble. But we need to be people who are engaging the world, so ultimately they can, whether it's in your school or your workplace, your community, your neighborhood, you need to be salt and light to the world. And if you're salt, it may make others thirsty for true life in Christ. And if you're light, people may see Jesus through you.